Today's presentation is from Daniel Havers. Daniel has supported numerous food and beverage manufacturers and retailers across Australia and Asia Pacific over his 11 years with SAI Global. In his current role, Daniel works closely with various industry stakeholders such as standards owners, retailers, regulators, and manufacturers to ensure that inspection and assessment standards and criteria are fully understood and supported by food safety auditors. Take it away, Daniel.
Hello and welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. The topic of my presentation, as the slide suggests, is auditing to make a difference. The expectations nowadays in many of the audit programs, food safety and quality, is that more time is actually spent in factory-based auditing in inspection. However, in the meantime, there remains the expectation that the audit must provide a full, complete assurance that the systems fully comply, with all the standard criteria and to all of the site's documented processes. This all has to be achieved in a finite time, with competing interests around, maximizing your time within the factory and operational-based activities, and also to look at documented systems and procedures and records, to really strike a balance to meet the objectives of a thorough audit. We need to be able to equip auditors, and that goes for both internal and external auditors, with the right tools to be able to perform effective audits, starting from situational based activities, challenging the way things are done, and then finally validating that the right procedures and records are in place. So really the question around audit outcomes as they currently exist, are they delivering? In the food industry, it sometimes feels like that we undergo a never-ending cycle of audits and inspections. From the perspective of the auditor and the manufacturer, supplier, we really become conditioned to this very quickly. And I guess over time, as things go by, we become a little bit battle fatigued about the audit process. For the manufacturer, these audits seem to come around so quickly. You never really feel like you're quite prepared as well as you would like to be. And what you viewed at one point as being a very positive activity that could help you with your processes and systems, it becomes just more of a, let's just get this done and then we can get on to the next thing and what's really important and get on to running our business. From the auditor's perspective, the cycle of audits can be quite extreme. It's week on week, it's 4 to 5 days a week. There's always the challenges around travel, different systems, different sites, different people. There is the real danger that the auditee and the auditor as well can fall into a very routine approach. I know what you want to see and I'll show you that from the manufacturer's point of view. And from the auditor's perspective, they know what the reader is looking for. I know what the scheme owner wants to see or what the hot points are. I know what the retailer wants to see. So I'll highlight these in my report. What we really need to do as auditors, as certification bodies, manufacturers, and indeed the whole food industry in general, is to reflect back and constructively ask ourselves, are the audits we actually do providing confidence that the food is safe? And it will continue to be so through its lifetime. And really, at the end of the day, are the customers' and consumers' expectations being met? Who are we ultimately conducting the audit for? If we look at the traditional notion around auditing, it's very much seen and perceived as a compliance activity. And the methods that we employ for conducting audits are very much derived from the rigidity of certification processes and protocols that are documented within those. The objective of an audit is that it provides a demonstration in the food safety management system that firstly it does conform to all of the specified requirements that are within that standard, be that an international standard, a GFSI standard, a retailer scheme, and so on and so forth. Secondly, the audit needs to provide that evidence that the system employed by the manufacturer, the supplier, it's consistently achieving its stated objectives in line with its policies. And thirdly, that the systems are effectively implemented and consistently applied. from a traditional sense and a traditional notion, this is typically measured by checking that, firstly, all the right procedures are in place as required by the standards. It then goes on to be sampling and checking of records are in place to support those procedures. And then thirdly, it's supplemented by observations which are made on the day. And there's a degree of luck in that sort of approach. It's always the auditor's gifts, what's happening on the day, Murphy's Law, that something will go wrong when the auditor walks out there. It's often more the low-hanging fruit, I guess. In the model of auditing for compliance, the time spent on auditing procedures, records, and then observations can quite easily be disproportionately skewed and biased towards records and procedures at the expense of the real key activities that are happening out in the facility. So there's a real need and a growing consciousness around that we need to audit where the action actually is. The evolution of audit approach and methodology has quite rightly led to increased focus, being on auditors, spending more time in the factory, and to be less office-based, less checklist-driven in their approach to the audit. This is largely driven by private label owners, manufacturers, customers' feedback, and through the findings of investigations into significant incidents, recalls, withdrawals, complaints, etc. That really show the root cause is largely from operational practices, site conditions, and generally some of the activities and practices being conducted by staff, as opposed to kind of being something missing from a documented procedure or a lapse in records or something like that. So many of the standards really now mandate that there are minimum times to be spent in an operational auditing situation. And they also, in some respects, clearly define what sort of criteria or which parts of the criteria are expected to be verified in situ in an operational activity. There does still remain, however, the expectation that the objective evidence is cited and reported, either through formal audit reports or exhaustive supplementary notes around the details of documented processes in place. It's largely driven by the reporting formats that are in play and the need and the perception that we need to provide evidence that we have seen it all and we've done a thorough audit. And it's also supplemented by the fact that many audit programs are full recertification audits every time. So year on year, we're doing a full audit as opposed to the notion of surveillance audits and things like that, where we might have an opportunity to do deep dive into certain areas that are significant. Really, by including exhaustive information and creating lengthy reports, we've really got to step back and ask ourselves, who is the information really for? Are we writing all of this information? Are we capturing all this data for the auditor, for the certification body, for the accreditation body, the scheme owner ultimately, or is it for the manufacturer, for them to get a good feedback on how their systems are? Or is it for the consumer or customer in the end, which is ultimately the person who consumes the product? The challenge for the modern audit, the modern auditor, is to strike the right balance between those operational-based auditing activities and other activities that are part of the audit process that will be effectively done away from that coalface. And it's really to ensure that the respective objectives of all of those interested parties are ultimately met in the reported outcome. As I said earlier, the audit time, it's not finite. It cannot keep expanding every 2 to 3 years when there's new criteria and there's new requirements that come into play. The time allocated to an audit needs to be appropriate to get the audit completed, and the audit and the efforts must be made to find the most efficient way, through employing smarter approaches to how we audit. So finding the right balance. How do we try to do that in the audit situation? So in reality, there's 3 key components of the audit. Firstly, there is the criteria. So ultimately, that is what the food safety or the quality system is ultimately measured against. and it comes in the form of the published standards, be they international standards, GFSI food safety standards, or retailer or second party standards ultimately. Secondly, there's the documentation. So that's really the accumulation of the requisite procedures, the policies, and any records that are either mandated by that published criteria in the first place, or it's ultimately developed by the site to support their system and their staff. Thirdly, there's activities. So they're the actions that are taken routinely within the business, the tasks and the actionable processes that really enable the realization of a safe and quality product at the end of the day. A successful and sound food safety system in the audit situation needs to demonstrate ultimately, firstly, the adequacy side of it, which is really the part where the documentation is found or assessed to comply and address the criteria within the standard. Secondly, there is the demonstration of compliance. So that's really to show that the activities undertaken by the site in realizing a safe and quality product match both the criteria in the published standard and any documentation and procedures that the site has created to support that. If we look in a traditional approach, the auditor focuses firstly on measuring criteria against the documentation. So that really is the adequacy part. So that really looks like, in practice, verifying that firstly the right procedures are in place, and it's secondly by sampling and checking that there are the right records in place. And this can be through random unspecified methods of sampling. So it really comes down to the auditor's assessment and techniques as to how they go about that. So in the context of the triangle, as I've said, that approach and in starting that way is really about assessing the adequacy of the system against the documentation versus criteria. This approach, in essence, it really may find what I call that low-hanging fruit, those auditor gifts, and it could really uncover a number of minor issues with documentation. But however, it's generally the starting point that many auditors start their audit approach. It effectively eats time into verifying the compliance activities versus criteria and documentation. So, and these are really the core part where if there are mistakes and there are problems in that area, they're the ones that are most likely to have a real impact on food safety. So in my own personal observations relative to the conduct of many audits, what's apparent is that at times is just the general routine rote lines of questioning, very predictable lines of questioning. Show me your procedures for this, what's the version, what's the issue date, do you make a record of this, questions like this. As an auditing profession, we need to really reflect on these methods of verification of the adequacy and the compliance and question its ultimate value to the end audit outcome. If we look at how technology will advance, and certainly even now it may be possible that software exists that could basically compare documentation, be they written procedures or records, against criteria and spit out and provide a summary of where the issues lie. So if there's ever a case for automation of various aspects of an audit, where auditors approach a line of questioning in this manner, they're really doing themselves a disservice here. So yes, whilst it's important in some respects to know that these procedures and records exist, we really have to make sure that our audit approach is tackling things in the right manner, that we can find or have the potential to find the most significant issues at the end of the day. So back to how do we make a change to our approach from the traditional notion of the audit approach to really thinking about how can we make a difference to the outcome at the end of the day in ultimately protecting the customer and the consumer. So first and foremost, we really must be conscious that we check the right things at the right time. So an audit plan, an audit must be structured such that we invest the correct amount of time where it matters most. And that's really immersed in the operations of the site. So conscious efforts must be made to prioritize the time to be actually where the activities are being undertaken on the days that, that the auditor is on site. And the concept's really not new, and it's been around for some time, and that philosophy is included in many management standards and GFSI standards for that matter as well. The reality really is that some auditors are quite good at doing this, and others are not so good at doing this. It really takes some time and effort and willpower to change and adapt our behaviours and ways of working to work in this way. So all of the interested parties, and by interested parties, we all share some responsibility in driving the right ways of behaving. That's CBs, scheme owners, retailers, manufacturers. We've got to support these endeavours through the audit process and drive these behaviours through reporting expectations that make us work in this manner. So looking at my table on the screen there, so really the three key points is to follow the product centricity through the audit. Ultimately, a product is what the consumer consumes. So above all else, we want to have the confidence that it's safe, and will continue to be so. So if we conclude our audit and we can put a hand on our heart and say we're confident that that's been achieved, that is obviously a very good thing. So we must keep the product as the centre of the attention through the audit approach, and whatever line of questioning and the flow and structure of the audit should always be following that product. From its raw materials right through to the point at which it's dispatched and delivered to its customer. We need that audit where the action is. So really every activity in that product realization process, in following product centricity, all of these steps are conducted outside of an office, essentially. So it really makes sense to go there and audit it as such. If there's documented procedures, documented policies and records that are applicable to that function, that process step or that department, we should really expect that they will be readily available at that point of use, and that the staff and employees out there will be able to access those when they're needed and really be conversant with those procedures. So why do we really think that sitting back somewhere else away from the production area and reviewing those types of records is the way to go when they are applicable to part of the process, and we should ask for them and review them as part of our observations within the factory? The auditor really has to challenge and test the existing work practices, and this is not really just asking how, it's really about showing, asking people to show you, to demonstrate, and to talk through the rationale for what is happening and what tasks they're performing out there. Ultimately, that will test and challenge the depth and understanding of the food safety and quality systems that are in play. And secondly, it really does test and gives an indication of the culture and the commitment that is shown within the factory to food safety and quality. By taking on this approach, there's always the fear from the auditor's perspective that they might miss something that is not clearly documented. However, in reality, any operational deficiencies that you see, any lack of awareness or training of staff that might be uncovered, and any demonstration of incorrect practices out there in the factory will ultimately uncover the situation anyway, as the root cause is often that the processes are inadequately documented and communicated, and therefore staff are inadequately informed and trained about how things actually need to be done. So there should never be the fear that that an auditor will overlook a small problem within documented processes and procedures, because when you challenge the ways of working, you'll ultimately discover that anyway. A little bit on observation skills. So I think we'd all be in agreement that from an auditor's perspective in an audit situation, observation skills are crucially important. So observation skills is really just not the act of seeing something and writing down what you've seen. The key words within the definition on the screen is seen and experienced. And the notion is not that the observation is just standing back and observing. Obviously, in an audit situation, there is a degree of standing back and observing, but to really close out the loop from the auditor perspective, this actually means immersing yourself in what is going on when they are in the facility. And again, to reiterate my points on the previous slide, in the context of auditing where the action is and testing and challenging the practices that are in play, this means getting involved with what the staff are doing. So actually participating in the text, test and activities in real time while they're happening. You want a demonstration of how things are done, and really to establish that the employees have a clear understanding of the reasons why they do things and why things are done and recorded. It goes without saying that good observation requires, the sound soft skills from the auditors, and an understanding at the end of the day that auditors need to shift from being pure data collectors and become better at interpreting what is going on and identifying where potential problems exist and where future food safety events may occur due to weaknesses in the systems. We need to place value on looking forward and not only looking back via observation and looking at completed records from a historical context. This approach will not always lead to non-conformance per se, though the conversation itself provides a platform for an improvement and increases the confidence and competence of the employees involved in the product handling, which better arms them for the future. Look a little bit on interview skills to follow on from observation skills. As observation skills involve experiencing what is happening, then it goes really without saying that interview skills are definitely required. All auditors, and again, the context of my talk here today is applicable to any auditor. That could be an internal auditor within a manufacturing facility, or indeed an external third-party, second-party auditor. But we need to be able to practice and consciously seek to improve our interview skills all the time. Ultimately, this is a critical success factor for adapting our audit techniques and styles beyond pure compliance assessment to a standard or to a checklist. And while the points on the slide here are really not an exhaustive list, or nor are they really a substitute for training and interview and listening skills, the application of these points as listed here will go a long way to improving the outcome of audits and establishing, I guess, a positive perspective in the auditor's mind about the value of the audit and the process of the audit. All right, so drawing all of these components together that we have discussed in my previous slides. So how does this look in the ideal audit scenario? So the auditor must always keep the product as the center of concern and build the audit outwards from there. So again, by thinking and keeping in mind that the goal is to have a safe quality product at the end of the process, then we should look at that in the context of let's follow the product through its life cycle through to dispatch to the customer. So again, by keeping it the center of your attention, it allows you to work in an approach that allows you to maximize your efforts within the facility and get information as you go. So along the journey, you can be looking at specifications, approved suppliers, raw materials, moving into manufacturing and looking at batching controls, CCPs, QCPs, weight labeling controls, line changeovers and labeling changes, then on to testing and analysis, and ultimately to product release and dispatch. I mean, that's not meant to be an exhaustive listing. However, it just gives you some ideas that if you follow the product centricity, you can pick many of those things up on the way in, and its relevance to what's going on at the time of the audit, as opposed to sitting back somewhere in an office looking at those sort of criteria in isolation. The auditor has obviously always got to start with the observations and situational based audit. and be conscious to observe, interact, and immerse themselves in what's going on out there. We need to maximise the time that we're out there doing those tasks and seeing those tasks. So it goes without saying that a good audit plan would always put the factory, the product inspections front and centre. We need to look at records in situ and really challenge the methods of how those results were obtained and the information that is being recorded. There's always the opportunity, obviously, to review further historical records as part of trace exercises that might be conducted, further product assessments that might be conducted, and there's other activities at the audit that give you opportunity to look at records. Purely sitting back within a sterile office environment and asking for kind of like 6 months worth of records, it doesn't necessarily add any value at the end of the day. By starting your approach and looking at records in situ and challenging how that number or how that record ended up on the paper really provides some opportunities to uncover some inconsistencies, or perhaps some opportunities where, if left unchecked, a potential food safety significant issue could occur. You can look at historical records and for months on end and actually find nothing wrong with them. All of the records, all of the numbers that are recorded were within range and okay. It's only when you talk to people on the line that you find out perhaps that there are certain people that don't quite understand how to obtain the record and the information, and perhaps are not conducting the tests and checks in the proper manner. So if we wrap the review of any documented procedures, wherever possible in the context of the observation and situational activities that you're reviewing. So to my earlier point, ask for those procedures and things like that at the point where they are applicable. So if it's a procedure that's relevant to a process step, then that's the point to ask for it and look for it, not back in the control room or boardroom or somewhere like that. So looking at my diagram, on the bottom, we look at the correct, if we look from left to right, the audit approach should be proportional in this manner. So firstly, we should be looking at observations. We supplement that with records that are being conducted and completed in situ within the plant. And finally, we supplement that with validating procedures that support what you see in actual fact happening and any records that are being completed. So if I expand a little further on the audit approach, which is observations first, records second, and finally procedures as a third point, if we take any standard that you can put your hand on or a set of criteria that we wish to measure a business against or a system against, if we break this down and allocate those items or those aspects, they can clearly be put into three of these brackets. We can easily find which are the things that can be verified by our observation, which of those things can be verified by looking at some records, and which of those things ultimately can be verified by looking at some procedures. In undertaking this activity, we can quickly pretty much provide ourselves a functional audit plan, essentially. And it's not so much a checklist, but it's more becomes a prompt of the items and the things that I, as an auditor, would be looking for. And it really helps drive allocating your time in the correct manner for the maximum benefit of the audit outcome. So it's quite surprising when you do pull this down, how many things do end up in the observation column. And generally, as it goes from left to right, there's less things that end up in the procedures column. So it makes a lot of sense from an audit starting viewpoint that we need to start our audits and focus our audits around maximising our time with observations in situational-based auditing. All new auditors or existing auditors would really be encouraged to, as part of training, to break down and contextualise any set of criteria in this manner. It not only helps to drive an understanding of the standard or criteria in the first place, but it also helps that auditor to focus on what can be looked at effectively and efficiently to verify the compliance and adequacy of a system. And it ensures, as I said earlier, that the right amount of time is spent in that observational and situational based auditing approach. So, in summary, some final thoughts that really help us to try to shift the mindset from auditor and auditee alike, auditing to make a difference, and how we make it the new normal. We really need to make this more than just the certificate. Make it more about than just the certificate. So, auditee, auditor alike, we need to view the audit as a genuine opportunity for continual improvement, a genuine opportunity to find and fix problems and prevent any future possibility of more significant issues occurring. So the notion of thinking beyond the certificate, it removes that feeling that the audit is an imposition, that it's a negative experience. At the end of the day, it's happening. So we all really should make the most of it and make sure that it provides some benefit for us in the future. We need to, as auditors and auditees alike, challenge the current audit and verification methods. So do they really challenge what is done and how effective things are being done? Or is it really just a checklist process to confirm that a procedure or a record is in place? From an internal audit perspective, from a manufacturer's, the recommendations would be to really look for opportunities to use your audits outside the context of just routine internal audits. In many standards, internal audits, it's a required function. You need to provide resources to do those internal audits. You need to provide trained resources. So there is a little bit of an investment in training people and providing the resource to do that. So we should really look to use that resource beyond its just normal capacity for routine compliance to standards. I really think there's some great opportunities to use that for business excellence and business improvement. Lastly, are NCRs really a bad thing? Well, we would always say to a site, would you rather an NCR? Would you rather a recall? Would you rather a withdrawal? At the end of the day, I think if we look at it in that context and don't necessarily measure ourselves on the number of non-conformances we get, but measure ourselves more on the number of significant food safety incidents or complaints, recalls and withdrawals that we get. So finally, we really need to continually reflect, and when I say we, I mean as an industry, being certification bodies, auditors, manufacturers, accreditation bodies, etc. We need to continually reflect and ask ourselves, ultimately, are the audits we're doing making food safe and providing confidence that the customer and consumer expectations are being met and will continue to be met for in the future? So thank you very much for your time in listening.
Thanks, Daniel. That concludes today's presentation.